Stand in the back, Victor, and for God's sake, keep your mouth shut. Don't embarrass me tonight." My wife Patricia hissed those words into my ear, her fingernails digging into my arm as she dragged me into the ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria. She thought I was just a senile old man she had to babysit. She didn't know that the guest of honor, the billionaire owner of the entire night global empire, was about to walk right past her, ignore her outstretched hand, and fall into my arms weeping. She whispered something into my ear that night that changed everything. She said, "Uncle Victor, I have been looking for you for 30 years. And then, as my wife dropped her champagne glass in shock, the billionaire leaned closer and whispered the part that froze my blood. She said, "Someone is accessing the secret trust fund you set up. They are using a forged signature. And I think that person is standing right next to you. My name is Victor Halloway. I am 72 years old. For the last decade, I have let the world think I am weak. I let them think I am just a retired engineer who spends his days feeding pigeons and forgetting where he put his glasses. But I remember everything. I remember the load-bearing limit of every bridge in this city because I helped design them. And I am about to dismantle the people who tried to destroy me, piece by piece. Before I tell you how I turned their greed into their prison, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps share this story with others who might be fighting their own silent battles. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you? I read every single comment. Now let me take you back to that night. The night the dominoes started to fall. The air in the ballroom smelled of expensive lilies and desperation. It was a charity gala for the restoration of historical landmarks, but everyone knew the real reason they were here. They were here to kiss the ring of Serena Knight. She had just taken over her late father's tech conglomerate and was making her debut in New York society. My wife Patricia was vibrating with anxiety. She was 55, 17 years my junior, and she wore a red dress that was perhaps a little too tight and a little too loud for the occasion. She pulled me behind a large marble pillar, shielding me from view, as if I were a stain on her reputation. "Fix your tie," she snapped, reaching out and yanking the silk knot so hard it choked me. "You look like you slept in that suit." Do not speak to anyone about your old construction stories. Nobody cares about concrete density or steel tension, Victor. These are important people. I am trying to close a deal for the firm. If you feel tired, just go sit in the lobby. Do not wander around looking lost. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the way her eyes scanned the room, hungry for status, completely bypassing me. I wanted to tell her that this suit was a bespoke piece from London, tailored for me 30 years ago, when I was the chief structural engineer for the city. I wanted to tell her that the very pillar she was hiding me behind was reinforced with a rebar technique I patented in 1985. But I said nothing. I just nodded. "I am sorry, Patricia," I said softly. "I will stay out of the way." She didn't even hear me. She was already turning away, putting on her practiced smile as she waded into the crowd. I stood there holding a glass of sparkling water, feeling the familiar ache of invisibility. It is a strange thing to be a man who once commanded thousands of workers, a man who built the skyline, and now be reduced to a nuisance. I watched Patricia laugh loudly at a joke made by a banker. I saw her touch his arm, her body language open and inviting. I saw my stepson Brandon across the room. He was 30 years old, wearing a tuxedo I paid for, drinking scotch I paid for, and laughing with a group of young socialites. He glanced at me once, rolled his eyes, and turned his back. They thought I was just the bank account, the fading resource. Then the room went silent. The heavy double doors swung open, and Serena Knight walked in. She was 42 now, but she had the same intense eyes I remembered from when she was a 12-year-old girl sitting in her father's office doing her homework while we argued over blueprints. She wore a simple black gown that made everyone else look like they were trying too hard. She walked with a terrifying grace. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. This was Patricia's moment. I watched my wife elbow her way to the front of the line. She had rehearsed this. She had her business card palmed in her hand. As Serena approached, Patricia stepped forward, blocking her path. "Miss Knight," Patricia said, her voice pitching up an octave. "It is such an honor. I am Patricia Halloway from Halloway Real Estate. We actually manage several properties near your new headquarters, and I would love to—" Serena didn't even slow down. She didn't blink. She looked right through Patricia as if my wife were made of glass. She didn't offer a hand. She didn't nod. She simply stepped around her, leaving Patricia standing there with her hand extended, her smile freezing into a rictus of humiliation. The people nearby snickered. Patricia went pale, her chest heaving with embarrassment. But Serena stopped. She stopped because she saw me. I was standing in the shadows of the pillar, trying to make myself smaller, but her eyes locked onto mine. For a second, the formidable CEO vanished, and I saw the little girl who used to call me Uncle Vic. Her composure cracked. Her hand flew to her mouth. She broke protocol. She walked away from the mayor and the investors. She walked straight toward the dark corner where I was hiding. The entire room turned to look. Patricia turned around confused, trying to see who had caught the billionaire's attention. Serena stopped 2 feet in front of me. Her eyes were swimming with tears. "Victor," she asked, her voice trembling, "is that really you?" I straightened my back. Old instincts kicked in. I set my water down. "Hello, Serena," I said. "You have done well for yourself. Your father would be proud." She let out a choked sob and threw her arms around me. It wasn't a polite social hug. It was a desperate embrace. She buried her face in my shoulder, ruining her makeup on my old suit. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. "I have been looking for you," she cried into my coat. "I have been looking for you since the funeral." "Why did you disappear? Why did you leave the firm?" I patted her back awkwardly. "I retired, Serena. It was time." "No," she pulled back, holding my face in her hands. "You saved us. That design you sent anonymously. The bridge modification. It saved the company from bankruptcy. It saved my father's reputation. He died trying to find you to thank you." I saw Patricia out of the corner of my eye. Her jaw was literally hanging open. She looked from me to Serena, her brain trying to compute how her useless, senile husband knew the most powerful woman in the room. She rushed over, sensing an opportunity to salvage her night. "Oh my goodness," Patricia exclaimed, forcing a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "You know my husband. Victor, darling, you never told me you were friends with the Knight family." Serena's head snapped toward Patricia. The warmth vanished from her face, instantly replaced by a look of cold steel. "Your husband?" Serena asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous temperature. "Yes," Patricia beamed, placing a possessive hand on my arm, the same arm she had pinched moments ago. "We have been married for 15 years. I take care of him. Poor dear is getting a bit fragile these days. You know how it is." Serena looked at Patricia's hand on my arm, then she looked at me. She saw the fraying cuffs of my shirt. She saw the sadness in my eyes that I couldn't hide. She saw the dynamic instantly. She was a predator in the boardroom. She knew how to spot a victim. "Fragile," Serena repeated, mocking the word. "This man is the strongest structural engineer of his generation. This man is the reason half of this city is still standing." Serena turned to the crowd, about to make a speech. I knew she was going to praise me. I knew she was going to offer me credit. But I also saw the look of pure, venomous jealousy rising in Patricia's eyes. If Serena humiliated Patricia now, my life at home would become a living hell. I wasn't ready to fight yet. I needed time. So I stopped her. I gently took Serena's hands. "Please," I said softly, "not tonight. Let's not make a scene. I am just an old man enjoying a party." Serena paused. She studied my face. She understood. She saw that I was protecting my wife, even though she didn't deserve it. A look of profound sadness crossed her face. She realized I wasn't just retired. She realized I was trapped. "Okay, Uncle Victor," she said softly. "Okay." She leaned in to kiss me on the cheek, a gesture of goodbye, but she didn't pull away. Her lips hovered near my ear, and her voice dropped to a whisper so low that only I could hear it. "Check the Night Trust, Victor, the one you set up for the contingency fund 30 years ago. Our auditors flagged it yesterday. Someone has been draining it. Small amounts at first, but now it is escalating. They are using a signature that looks exactly like yours, but the pressure points are wrong." She pulled back and looked me dead in the eye. "Victor, the transfers are being routed to a shell company registered to an address in the Hamptons. An address I believe you own." My heart stopped. The Hamptons house. I had signed that house over to Patricia 2 years ago for tax purposes. Serena squeezed my hand one last time hard. "Watch your back," she whispered. "You are sleeping next to the thief." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing there while the room exploded into whispers. Patricia dug her nails into my arm again, but this time I didn't feel the pain. I only felt the cold, hard clarity of a structural engineer, realizing that the foundation of his house was rotting, and it was time to bring the whole thing down. The silence inside the limousine was heavier than the reinforced concrete pillars, passing in a blur outside my tinted window. My wife sat as far away from me as the leather seat would allow, her chest heaving with a mixture of rage and terror that she was trying desperately to convert into authority. She did not look at me. She stared straight ahead at the partition separating us from the driver, her fingers twisting the diamond ring I had bought her 5 years ago until the skin around it turned red. I knew she was calculating. Her mind was a frantic abacus trying to subtract the damage caused by Serena Knight's embrace from the sum of her social ambitions. I stayed quiet. I learned a long time ago that silence is a structural element. If you let it sit long enough, the other person will eventually crack under the weight of it. "You are pathetic," she finally whispered, the words hissing through her clenched teeth. I turned my head slowly to look at her. The passing streetlights cut across her face, highlighting the deep lines of stress around her mouth that no amount of expensive cream could fill. "I did exactly what you asked, Patricia," I said, keeping my voice level and calm. I stood in the back. I didn't speak. "Do not play smart with me, Victor," she snapped, turning on me with eyes that burned. "You think I didn't see you manipulating her? That poor woman is obviously confused. She probably mistook you for her grandfather or some old gardener. And you just stood there and let her cry on your shoulder like a senile old fool. It was humiliating. The way people looked at us. They weren't looking at a reunion, Victor. They were looking at a charity case. She was gaslighting me. It was a technique she had perfected over the last 3 years, chipping away at my reality one sentence at a time. She wanted me to doubt my own memory, to doubt the very fabric of my past. Serena seemed very clear about who I was, I replied softly. She remembered the bridge designs. She remembered the firm. Patricia let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "The bridge designs," she mocked. "Victor, you haven't looked at a blueprint in 15 years. You can barely remember to take your blood pressure medication in the morning. Dr. Evans told me this would happen. He said the dementia would start with grandeur, with you inventing stories to make yourself feel important again. That is what happened tonight. You projected your delusions onto that woman, and she was just too polite to correct you." I looked away from her venom and out the window. We were crossing the suspension bridge that connected the city to the suburbs. I felt the slight vibration of the tires against the asphalt joints. Most people just felt a bump. I felt the physics. I watched the steel cables sweeping up toward the dark sky. I closed my eyes for a second, and the numbers flooded my mind, clear as crystal. Tensile strength of 50,000 pounds per square inch. Wind shear factor calculated for a Category 3 hurricane. I remembered the day I argued with the contractor about the grade of steel for the anchor bolts. I remembered the smell of the welding torches and the cold coffee in the trailer. "I am not senile, Patricia," I said, speaking more to the window than to her. "I remember that this bridge has a live load capacity of 4,000 pounds per linear foot. I remember that we had to delay the pouring of the west pylon because of a labor strike in 1982. I remember everything." Patricia reached over and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, fueled by adrenaline. "Stop it," she hissed. "Stop babbling numbers. You are scaring me. You are sounding crazy again. This is exactly why I can't leave you alone for 5 minutes. You are getting worse, Victor. Tonight proved it. You are a liability." She released my wrist and held out her hand, palm up. "Give me your phone," she demanded. I looked at her hand, then up at her face. "Why?" I asked. "Because you are agitated," she said, her voice shifting into a fake, sickly sweet tone that was worse than the yelling. "You need to disconnect. Dr. Evans said screen time is bad for your condition. It overstimulates your brain and causes these episodes. I am doing this for you, Victor. I am trying to protect you from your own confusion. Hand it over. Now." I hesitated. My phone was my lifeline. It was the only way I could contact Serena or check the bank accounts she had warned me about. But I knew the game. If I refused, Patricia would escalate. She would scream, she would tell the driver to pull over, she would create a scene that would end with her sedating me. I wasn't ready to blow my cover yet. I needed her to think she still had the upper hand. I needed her to think I was the weak, obedient husband she had broken. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my jacket pocket. I felt the cool metal of the device. I pulled it out and placed it in her waiting hand. "Good," she said, dropping the phone into her purse and snapping it shut like a coffin lid. "You will get it back when you are stable. Maybe in a week, maybe 2. Now lean back and close your eyes. Try to sleep. You look exhausted." I did lean back, but I didn't close my eyes. I watched her. I watched her pull out her own phone immediately. I saw the glow of the screen illuminate her face. She was typing furiously, texting Brandon, no doubt, warning him, telling him that the billionaire had made contact, telling him to accelerate whatever plan they had in motion. The rest of the drive passed in a suffocating silence. The air in the car felt thin, as if she were sucking all the oxygen out of the space. My heart was pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Serena's warning echoed in my head. "You are sleeping next to the thief." I looked at my wife's profile. I remembered the day we met. She had been a junior realtor, eager and seemingly kind. I remembered how she had nursed me after my heart surgery, how she had promised that we would travel the world. When did the mask fall off? Was it gradual, like rust eating through iron, or was it sudden, a structural failure? I had been too blind to see. The car turned off the highway and wound its way through the dark, tree-lined streets of our neighborhood. We pulled up to the gate of the estate. The house I had bought with the bonuses from the Skyline project stood on the hill, dark and imposing. It didn't look like a home anymore. It looked like a fortress that had been captured by the enemy. The driver opened my door. I stepped out into the cool night air, my legs feeling stiff. Patricia was already halfway to the front door, her heels clicking sharply on the stone path. She didn't wait for me. She didn't offer her arm. She unlocked the heavy oak door and disappeared inside, leaving it open for me to follow, like a stray dog. I walked up the steps, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. I stepped into the foyer. The house was quiet, but it was a deceptive quiet. It was the silence of a held breath. Patricia was already heading up the main staircase, calling out for the maid to run a bath. She didn't look back. "Go to bed, Victor," she threw over her shoulder. "Don't wander around. Take your night pills." I stood in the center of the hallway. To my right was the living room, dark and empty. To my left was the corridor leading to my private study. My study was my sanctuary. It was where I kept my drafting table, my awards, and the wall safe hidden behind the painting of the Brooklyn Bridge. It was the one room Patricia and Brandon were strictly forbidden to enter. I had the only key, and I always kept the door locked. But as I looked down the corridor, a sliver of light cut across the floorboards. My stomach dropped. The door to my study was ajar. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I hadn't left it open. I checked it 3 times before we left for the gala. It was a habit, a compulsion born of suspicion. I knew I had locked it. I took a step toward the corridor. My expensive dress shoes made no sound on the Persian rug. I moved slowly, hugging the wall the same way I used to navigate construction sites to avoid falling debris. As I got closer, I heard sounds coming from inside the room. It wasn't the sound of cleaning. It was the sound of destruction. The tearing of paper. The heavy thud of books being thrown onto the floor. The metallic click of a lock mechanism being forced. I stopped just outside the doorframe. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack them. I wasn't just an old man coming home from a party anymore. I was a witness at a crime scene, and the criminal was inside destroying the last remnants of my legacy. I reached out and pushed the door open just another inch, peering into the slice of the room revealed by the gap. And what I saw made the blood freeze in my veins. I pushed the door open the rest of the way, and the heavy oak swung inward with a groan that felt like a warning. The sight that greeted me was a violation. My study, the one room in this house where I still felt like a man of intellect and purpose, had been ransacked. Drawers were pulled out and dumped onto the Persian rug. Blueprints for the suspended railway project in Chicago, which I had hand-drawn in 1992, were crumpled and tossed aside like trash. But the real insult was standing right in the center of the chaos. Brandon was leaning against my mahogany desk, holding a bottle of my 30-year-old scotch. He hadn't even bothered to use a glass. He took a swig straight from the bottle as he watched me enter. He was 30 years old, but in that moment he looked like a petulant teenager who had broken into the liquor cabinet. He was wearing the tuxedo jacket he had worn to the gala, but his tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck like a noose he was too stupid to tighten. "Well, look who finally decided to come home," Brandon slurred slightly, a smirk plastering itself across his face. "Mom said you were tired. You don't look tired, Victor. You look lost. Did you forget which room was yours again?" He didn't move. He didn't apologize for being in the one room he was forbidden to enter. He didn't try to hide the fact that he was rifling through my private files. Instead, he kicked a stack of engineering journals with the toe of his shiny Italian shoe. "Get out," I said. My voice was low, but it vibrated in my chest. "This is my office, Brandon. You have no right to be in here." "Right." He laughed, a harsh barking sound. He set the bottle down on a coaster made of rare marble, a gift from the mayor of Boston, and leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Let's talk about rights, Victor. What rights does a parasite have? You live in my mother's house. You eat her food. You wear clothes she picks out. You are just a line item in her budget, old man. A very expensive, useless line item." I stepped further into the room, my eyes scanning the destruction. Then I saw it. The wall safe behind the painting of the Brooklyn Bridge was wide open. The digital lock hadn't been forced. It had been opened with the code. Only I knew that code, or so I thought. My heart hammered against my ribs. I walked toward the safe, my legs feeling heavy, not just from age, but from the dread pooling in my stomach. The metal box was empty. The stack of government bonds I had been accumulating for 40 years, my safety net, my emergency fund, the money I planned to leave to a scholarship for young engineers, was gone. "Looking for this?" Brandon asked. I turned around. He was holding a single sheet of paper between two fingers, waving it casually in the air. I recognized the letterhead immediately. It was a transfer confirmation from the brokerage firm. I snatched the paper from his hand. My eyes raced over the text. The beneficiary name had been changed. It didn't say Victor Halloway anymore. It said Halloway and Associates, a shell company controlled by Patricia. And below that, listed as a managing partner, was Brandon. "You stole it," I whispered, the paper trembling in my hand. "You forged my signature, and you stole my life savings." "Stole is such a harsh word," Brandon said, stepping closer to me. He loomed over me, using his height to intimidate. "We call it aggressive portfolio management. Mom and I decided that you were too high risk to manage your own assets. I mean, look at you. You are shaking. You can barely hold a piece of paper. How can you be trusted with a portfolio worth $2 million? We just moved it to a safer place." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of car keys. He jingled them in front of my face. Besides, it was a good investment. "Have you seen the new Porsche in the driveway? Turbo S 0 to 60 in 2.6 seconds. That is what smart money buys Victor. Not dusty old bonds that sit there doing nothing. I am actually living. I am building an image. Something you wouldn't understand with your cheap suits and your boring stories about concrete." The rage that surged through me was hot and blinding. It wasn't just the money. It was the disrespect. It was the fact that this boy who had never worked a day in his life, who had dropped out of 3 colleges I paid for, was standing there mocking the blood and sweat of my career. I worked 18-hour days on oil rigs in the North Sea to earn that money. I said, my voice rising. I risked my life inspecting bridge cables in freezing winds while you were still in diapers. That money isn't just paper, Brandon. It is my life. And you are going to put it back. Tomorrow morning. Or I am calling the police. Brandon didn't flinch. He didn't look scared. He looked bored. "Call them," he said, taking another sip of scotch. Who are they going to believe? The successful young entrepreneur and his respected mother, or the 70-year-old man with a documented history of confusion and paranoia? Mom has been building a file on you for months, Victor. Every time you forgot your keys, every time you got angry. It is all documented. Dr. Evans signed off on it last week. We have power of attorney pending. You are not a victim, Victor. You are a patient. He poked me in the chest with a hard finger. So go to bed. And if you are good, maybe I will let you sit in the Porsche. But don't touch anything. I don't want your old man's smell on the leather. I stared at him, my hands clenching into fists. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to wipe that smug look off his face. I took a step forward, raising my hand. But then the room tilted. It wasn't a stumble. It was a sudden, violent vertigo. The floor seemed to rush up toward my face. The corners of my vision went dark. My legs, which had carried me up the skeletons of skyscrapers, suddenly turned to water. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself, gasping for air. My chest felt tight. My tongue felt thick and heavy in my mouth. What? What did you do? I choked out. I fell to my knees. The impact jarred my spine. I looked up at Brandon, expecting to see shock or concern, but he was just smiling. It was a cold, detached smile. He looked at his watch, then down at me. Right on time, he said softly. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't call for help. He just stood there watching me struggle to breathe, watching me crawl on the carpet of my own study. Mom put a little something extra in your evening tea before we left, he explained, his voice sounding far away like he was speaking from the end of a long tunnel. Just to help you relax. You seemed so stressed about the gala. And look at you now. You are practically asleep. My vision blurred. Brandon's face split into two, then dissolved into a gray fog. I tried to speak, tried to say poison, but only a groan came out. I collapsed onto my side, my cheek pressed against the rough wool of the rug. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was Brandon's polished shoes turning away. "Sweet dreams, old man," he said. "Try not to drool on the carpet." I heard the door close. I heard the lock click. And then there was only silence. I was a prisoner in my own home, my mind drifting into a chemical void, knowing that the people I loved were not just thieves. They were executioners. And I had to wake up before the sentence was carried out. I woke up with a taste of copper in my mouth and a fog in my brain so thick I could almost touch it. The morning sun was streaming through the heavy velvet curtains, but it brought no warmth, only a piercing headache that throbbed behind my eyes. I tried to sit up, but the room spun violently. It felt like the structural integrity of my own body had been compromised. My limbs were heavy, unresponsive, like concrete that hadn't set properly. Patricia was already there. She was standing by the bedside table, dressed in a crisp white blouse, looking every inch the devoted wife. She was stirring a spoon into a glass of warm milk. The clinking sound of metal against glass echoed in my skull like a jackhammer. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she cooed, her voice sickeningly sweet. "You slept late. Dr. Evans said you would. It is just the exhaustion from the gala. You overexerted yourself, Victor." She sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under her weight. She held out the glass of milk and a small blue pill in her other palm. "Here," she said, smiling. "Drink this, and take your memory supplement. You missed your dose last night because you had that episode in your study. We don't want you forgetting who you are, do we?" I looked at the pill. It was blue round and innocent-looking. But as a man who has spent 40 years analyzing materials looking for stress fractures and impurities, I noticed something immediately. The texture was wrong. The coating was slightly uneven, powdery on one edge, as if it had been pressed in a hurry or stored in a humid environment. It wasn't the pharmaceutical-grade coating of the expensive supplements I had been taking for years. And then she dropped it into the milk. It didn't sink immediately. It floated for a second, then began to dissolve with alarming speed, leaving a faint milky trail that swirled like smoke. A true enteric-coated medication is designed to withstand stomach acid. It shouldn't dissolve in lukewarm milk in 3 seconds. My engineer's brain, usually sluggish in the mornings lately, suddenly snapped into high alert. The variable had changed. The density was off. This wasn't medicine. This was a delivery system. I looked up at Patricia. Her eyes were fixed on the glass, watching the pill dissolve with an intensity that betrayed her. She wasn't nursing me. She was dosing me. I forced a weak smile, masking the terror that was clawing at my throat. "Thank you, dear," I croaked, my voice rough. "You are too good to me." I took the glass. Her hands hovered, ready to catch it if I dropped it, or perhaps ready to force it down my throat if I refused. I raised it to my lips. The smell was cloying warm milk and something chemical, something bitter underneath the lactose. I took a large sip, letting the liquid fill my mouth, but I didn't swallow. I held it there, fighting the gag reflex. I made a show of swallowing, bobbing my Adam's apple, then took another sip, holding that too. "I need bathroom," I mumbled, clutching my stomach. Patricia sighed, looking annoyed that her schedule was being interrupted. "Make it quick, Victor. We have a busy day. The lawyers are coming at noon." I nodded and stumbled toward the ensuite bathroom. I kept my posture hunched, my steps shuffling, playing the part of the frail old man she wanted me to be. The moment I closed the heavy door and locked it, I straightened up. I spat the mouthful of milk into a handkerchief I pulled from my pajama pocket. I stared at the liquid soaking into the white cotton. It was blue-tinged. I needed proof. Suspicion is not data. Data is proof. I remembered Timmy, the neighbor's kid, a bright 12-year-old boy who lived in the house behind ours. I had been tutoring him in science, helping him with a chemistry project for the state fair. We had built a small lab in the old gardening shed at the back of the property, a place Patricia never visited. because she was afraid of spiders. We had a testing kit there, a simple reagent set for identifying common chemical compounds. I flushed the toilet to make noise. I turned on the tap. Then I opened the bathroom window. It was a tight squeeze, but I was thinner than I used to be. I climbed out onto the trellis, ignoring the pain in my joints. I dropped into the flower bed below, ruining Patricia's prize hydrangeas. I moved quickly, keeping low behind the hedges. The morning air cleared my head slightly, but the residual drugs from last night were still dragging at my ankles. I made it to the shed and slipped inside. The smell of potting soil and sulfur greeted me. I found the kit under a stack of clay pots. I grabbed a test tube and squeezed the liquid from my handkerchief into it. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from rage. I added a drop of the reagent we used to test for sedatives, a project Timmy had chosen after his grandmother passed away from an overdose. I waited. The reaction time for barbiturates is less than a minute. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 10. The liquid in the tube didn't turn clear. It turned a deep, violent violet. Barbiturates. Phenobarbital likely. A heavy sedative used to treat seizures. In high doses it causes confusion, memory loss, ataxia, and eventually coma. It mimics the symptoms of dementia perfectly. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being chemically lobotomized. I stared at the violet liquid, realizing the magnitude of their cruelty. They weren't just killing me. They were erasing me. They were turning Victor Halloway, the architect, into a drooling vegetable so they could parade me in front of a judge and say, "Look, he is gone. Give us the money." I poured the sample into a small vial and hid it in my pocket. This was my evidence. This was the weapon I would use to destroy them. I climbed back through the window just as Patricia knocked on the door. "Victor, are you okay in there? You have been in there for 10 minutes. I flushed the toilet again and splashed cold water on my face. I looked in the mirror. The man staring back wasn't the victim from last night. His eyes were hard. His jaw was set. I unlocked the door and stepped out. Patricia was standing there, arms crossed, tapping her foot. "I am fine," I said, my voice steady. "Just an old man's bladder, Patricia." She scrutinized me, looking for signs of the drug taking effect. I let my eyelids droop slightly. I let my mouth hang open a fraction of an inch. "Good," she said, satisfied that I looked vacant. "Get dressed. Wear the gray suit. The one that looks a bit loose on you. We want you to look sympathetic." I nodded obediently. As she turned to leave, her phone rang. She pulled it out of her pocket, glancing at the screen. "It is the lawyer," she muttered. She walked out into the hallway, leaving the door slightly ajar. I moved to the threshold, straining my ears. "Yes, David," she said into the phone, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Yes, he took the dose. He is already glazing over. No, he won't be able to read the contract. He can barely stand up. Just get the conservatorship papers ready. We need to do this today. I don't want him waking up and talking to that night woman again." She paused, listening to the person on the other end. Then she laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound. "Don't worry. By the time we get to the office, he won't even know his own name. He will sign whatever we put in front of him." She hung up and walked away, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I stood there in the doorway, clutching the vial in my pocket. She was wrong. I knew my name. I was Victor Halloway. And today I wasn't going to sign my life away. I was going to rewrite the contract. The air outside was crisp, but it smelled of surveillance. I stepped out onto the porch, buttoning my gray cardigan with deliberate slowness. I knew Brandon was watching from the living room window. I could feel his eyes on my back, heavy and mocking. To him, I was just an old man going for his daily shuffle around the block, a routine as predictable as the sunrise. He didn't know that today the routine was a diversion. I started walking down the driveway, leaning heavily on my cane. I made sure to drag my left foot, slightly mimicking the ataxia caused by the phenobarbital. It was a performance, and my life depended on the reviews. As I reached the sidewalk, I heard the front door open behind me. "Going somewhere?" Victor Brandon called out. He wasn't asking. He was checking the perimeter. "Just to the park," I wheezed, not turning around. "Need fresh air. The house smells like cleaning fluid." "Don't go far," he shouted back, his voice dripping with condescension. "And keep your phone on you. Mom tracks your location." Remember, I didn't answer. I just kept shuffling. I walked 2 blocks at a snail's pace, letting the neighbors see me. Poor Mr. Halloway, they probably thought. Look how frail he has become. But the moment I turned the corner onto Elm Street, my posture changed. I straightened my spine. I picked up the pace. I knew Brandon would follow. He was lazy, but he was paranoid. Sure enough, a block later I heard the distinctive purr of the Porsche engine idling at the intersection. He was trailing me, keeping a safe distance, probably texting on his phone while he watched the old man walk. I was counting on his arrogance. I was counting on him underestimating the terrain. We were approaching the old 4th Street intersection. I knew something Brandon didn't. I knew that the city was doing emergency repairs on the underground sewage line there. I knew because I still read the municipal engineering reports every morning online. Another habit Patricia thought was just a senile quirk. I saw the orange barriers ahead. The sign said, "Road closed, pedestrians only." I walked straight toward the construction site. Brandon's Porsche slowed down. He couldn't follow me through the narrow pedestrian walkway lined with concrete Jersey barriers. He honked his horn, a sharp, irritated sound. "Hey, where are you going?" he yelled through the open window. I turned and waved vaguely, acting confused. Just looking at the pipes," I shouted back, my voice wavering. He slammed his hand on the steering wheel. He couldn't leave the car there. It was a tow zone. He had to drive around the block to catch me on the other side. That detour would take him exactly 4 minutes in midday traffic. I had 4 minutes. The moment he turned the car around, I moved. I didn't shuffle. I ran. It wasn't a sprint, my knees were too old for that, but it was a fast, determined stride. I ducked under the yellow caution tape. A worker in a hard hat looked up, about to yell at me. "Hey, you can't be in here." I looked him dead in the eye. "Check the shoring on the West Trench," I barked, using the command voice I hadn't used in 15 years. "The soil density is too low for that bracing. You are going to have a collapse if you don't reinforce it." The worker froze. He recognized the tone. He recognized the jargon. While he hesitated, confused by this authority figure disguised as a pensioner, I slipped past him and through a gap in the construction fence that led to the back alley of the library. I was out. I was a ghost. I made it to the designated extraction point behind the old train station. A black SUV with tinted windows was waiting in the shadows of the underpass. The door opened before I even reached it. I climbed inside. The interior was cool and smelled of expensive leather and security. Serena was sitting there, her face pale. Beside her sat a man with a tablet, her head of security likely. "Uncle Victor," she gasped, reaching out to touch my hand. "You are shaking." "I am fine," I said, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "It is just the adrenaline, and maybe a little bit of the poison." Poison. Her eyes widened. "That is it. We are going to the police. Right now. We are getting a blood test. We are getting a restraining order, and we are arresting them for attempted murder." She tapped the partition to signal the driver. "No," I said sharply. Serena stopped. She looked at me confused. "Victor, they are drugging you. They are stealing from you." "Why would you protect them?" "I am not protecting them," I said, my voice cold and hard. "I am hunting them." I took a deep breath, letting the cool air of the car settle my nerves. "If we go to the police now, what happens? They claim it was a mistake with the medication. They claim I am confused. They have a doctor on their payroll, who will testify that I am mentally incompetent. Best case scenario, they get a slap on the wrist, and I spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. I looked Serena in the eye. I don't want them slapped, Serena. I want them crushed. I want them to lose everything they think they have won. I want them to feel the ground crumble beneath their feet because they were too greedy to check the foundation. Serena stayed silent for a moment, studying my face. She saw the engineer in me. She saw the man who calculated loads and stresses. "What do you need?" she asked softly. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I had sketched it out on a napkin before I left the house. "I need a project," I said. "A big one. The kind of project that makes people irrational with greed." Serena took the paper. She frowned. "Project Skyline. We shelved that idea 5 years ago. It is too risky. The zoning laws in that district are a nightmare." "Exactly," I said. "It is a ghost project. It looks real on paper. It looks magnificent. $50 million in development fees alone. I want you to announce that you are reviving it. And I want you to announce that because of the complex structural challenges, you will only work with one specific consultant." "Me," she whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You," I nodded. "But here is the catch. You tell them that the board is hesitant. You tell them that to secure the contract, the lead consultant needs to put up a collateral bond. A significant one. Enough to bankrupt them if the project falls through. Patricia and Brandon are greedy," I continued, my voice low. "They have been spending money they don't have. They are leveraged to the hilt. If they think they can get a piece of a $50 million pie, they will sign anything. They will leverage the house, the cars, the jewelry. They will put everything on the table. And when they do," Serena said, a slow smile spreading across her face, "we pull the rug out." "No," I corrected her. "We don't pull the rug out. We let them stand there while the concrete sets around their feet. We let them sign the papers. We let them think they have won. And then I reveal that the consultant they just leveraged everything to represent is legally incompetent according to their own filings." I leaned back in the seat, feeling the first wave of real satisfaction I had felt in years. They want to prove I am crazy, fine. Let them prove it. But if I am crazy, then every contract I sign is void. And if the contract is void, they are in default on their collateral. They lose the house. They lose the money. They lose it all. Serena looked at the sketch again. Then she looked at her security chief. "Get the legal team on the phone," she commanded. "Tell them to draft a consultant agreement for the Skyline project, and make it look ironclad." She turned back to me. Her eyes were shining. "You are terrifying, Uncle Victor," she said. "I am a structural engineer," I replied, checking my watch. "I have exactly 2 minutes to get back to the park before Brandon realizes I am not looking at sewage pipes. Drop me off at the corner. The show must go on." I opened the door and stepped back out into the sunlight. I wasn't just an old man anymore. I was the architect of their destruction. And construction was about to begin. By the time I returned from the park, the atmosphere in the house had shifted so drastically, it felt like walking into a different dimension. Usually the air was thick with resentment, and the silence was weaponized. But today, the moment I opened the front door, the smell of roasting coffee and fresh pastries hit me. It wasn't the stale toast I was usually allowed. It was the scent of bribery. I shuffled into the kitchen, keeping my head down, dragging my left leg just enough to sell the performance. Patricia was standing by the kitchen island, and for the first time in years, she wasn't glaring at me. She was beaming. Her eyes were wide and manic, shining with the kind of intensity you usually see in gamblers who just realized the slot machine is broken and pouring out coins. "There he is," she cooed, her voice trembling with excitement. "Look who decided to grace us with his presence. Come sit down, Victor. Brandon, pull out the chair for your father." My stepson, The same man who had stepped over my collapsed body the night before jumped up from the table. He was grinning. It was a shark's grin, all teeth and no warmth, but he actually pulled out my chair. He even patted my shoulder. "Sit down, Dad," he said. "You look tired. You need your strength today." I sat slowly, letting my hands shake as I reached for the napkin. I looked from one to the other, feigning confusion. What is happening?" I asked, my voice thin and raspy. "Is it my birthday?" Patricia laughed, a high tinkling sound that grated on my nerves like metal on glass. "Better than a birthday, darling," she said, sliding a plate of eggs and smoked salmon in front of me. "Much better. We just saw the news." Serena Knight held a press conference. She picked up the remote and turned up the volume on the small kitchen TV. There was Serena standing at a podium, looking powerful and untouchable. The headline scrolled beneath her: "Knight Global revives historic skyline project. $50 million investment." I watched Serena speak. She was perfect. She looked into the camera with deadly seriousness and delivered the line we had rehearsed. "This project is structurally complex," she said. "It requires a level of expertise that has been lost in modern architecture. Therefore, Knight Global will only move forward with the Skyline Tower on one condition. The lead structural consultant must be the original visionary of the city's infrastructure, Mr. Victor Halloway. Without his signature, there is no project." Patricia muted the TV, her chest heaving. "Did you hear that, Victor?" she whispered, leaning across the table. "She wants you. She wants to pay a consulting fee that, well, let's just say it is enough to secure our future. All of our futures." I blinked slowly, trying to look like the information was processing through a fog of medication. "Me," I mumbled. "But I am retired. I don't do that anymore." Brandon leaned in, his cologne overpowering the smell of the food. "You don't have to do anything, Dad," he said, his voice low and urgent. "That is the beauty of it. Mom and I will handle the logistics. We will handle the meetings. We will handle the paperwork. All you have to do is be the face. Just sign the initial agreement, and we take care of the rest." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document. The paper was heavy legal bond. I recognized the letterhead of Serena's legal team. Patricia placed a pen next to the document. It was my old fountain pen, the one she had hidden away years ago because she said I would just stain my shirts with it. "We need to move fast, Victor," she said. "Opportunities like this don't wait. We need to lock this in before she changes her mind." I stared at the document. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. I had helped draft it in the back of the SUV. But I needed to make sure they had taken the bait. I needed to know they had put their own necks on the line. I reached for the glasses in my pocket, my hand trembling violently. I knocked over the salt shaker. Salt spilled across the table. "Oh, clumsy me," I muttered, starting to panic. "I am sorry. I am so clumsy." Usually Patricia would have screamed. She would have called me a useless old fool. But today she just smiled tightly. "It is okay, Victor. Leave it. Just look at the contract." I put on my glasses and peered at the page. I flipped to the section on collateral, and there it was. Paragraph 14. To ensure the commitment of the consultant and his managing representatives, a collateral bond equal to 20% of the project value is required upon signing. That was $10 million. They didn't have $10 million. I looked up at them, my eyes wide. "This number," I said, pointing a shaking finger at the page. "It is very big. Do we have to pay this?" Brandon exchanged a quick look with Patricia. I saw the greed warring with the fear in his eyes. "Don't worry about that, Dad," he said quickly. "We are leveraging the assets, the house, the cars, the portfolio. It is just a formality. Once the first payment from Knight Global comes in next week, the collateral is released. It is standard business. You trust us, don't you?" I looked at him. I saw the desperation. They were betting everything. They were putting the house I bought, the money I earned, and the very clothes on their backs onto the table, convinced that this was a sure thing. I looked at Patricia. Is it safe?" I asked, sounding like a frightened child. "It is the safest thing in the world, Victor," she said, and for once she was almost telling the truth. It was safe for me. It was fatal for them. I picked up the pen. It felt heavy in my hand, familiar and grounding. I let the nib hover over the signature line. I hesitated. I looked at the window, then back at them. "I want to help," I said softly. "I want to be useful again." "You are useful, Victor," Patricia said, and I could hear the strain in her voice. She was holding her breath. "Just sign." I lowered the pen. I signed my name. I made sure the signature was shaky, looking exactly like the writing of a man in decline, but legally it was valid. It was the signature of a man reclaiming his throne. The moment the ink touched the paper, the tension in the room snapped. Brandon let out a loud whoop and snatched the paper away as if he were afraid I would eat it. Patricia slumped back in her chair, closing her eyes, a look of pure ecstasy on her face. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." I sat there watching them celebrate their own funeral. I wiped a crumb from my lip. Can I go lie down now?" I asked. "I feel very tired." Yes, go, lie down." Patricia waved her hand dismissively, her eyes already glued to the contract, calculating her cut. I stood up slowly and began the long shuffle out of the kitchen. I kept my head down, looking at the floor tiles. As I reached the doorway, I paused. They thought I was out of earshot. They thought I was just background noise. I heard Brandon's voice, low and excited. "So when do we make the move?" And then I heard Patricia. Her voice was a hiss, a serpent uncoiling in the dark. As soon as the first wire transfer clears, she whispered, "We can't have him messing this up with his drooling and his stories. I have already called the facility in upstate, the secure unit. We will drop him off next Friday. We will tell the press he took a sudden turn for the worse and needed specialized care. By the time anyone asks questions, we will have power of attorney over the entire 50 million. She laughed, a soft, cruel sound. "Just let him sign the papers," she said. "After that, he can rot in a padded room for all I care." I didn't flinch. I didn't turn around. I gripped my cane tighter, feeling the wood bite into my palm. I walked down the hallway, listening to them counting money that didn't exist. They were planning to lock me away. They were planning to bury me. But they forgot one thing. You never bury a structural engineer until you are sure the foundation is sound. And the ground beneath them was about to open up and swallow them whole. I walked into my room and closed the door. I didn't lie down. I went to the window and watched the sky, waiting for the storm to break. The house at 2 a.m. was not silent. It was alive with the settling of timber and the hum of the refrigerator. But to me, it sounded like a minefield. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening to the rhythmic breathing of the house, waiting for the deep silence that meant deep sleep. Patricia was in the master suite down the hall, and Brandon was in the guest wing. They were sleeping the sleep of the righteous, or in their case, the sleep of the victorious. They thought they had won. They thought the old man was drugged and helpless in his room, dreaming of concrete and steel. They did not know that I had spat out the evening pill into a tissue. They did not know that the old engineer is about to dismantle their entire operation from the inside. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet touching the cold, hardwood floor. I didn't turn on a light. I didn't need one. I knew the load-bearing walls of this house better than the architect who drew them. I knew which floorboard squeaked outside the bathroom and which door hinge needed oiling. I moved like a shadow, a ghost haunting his own life. I was heading for Patricia's office. Not the shared study where Brandon had humiliated me, but her private sanctuary, the room where the real decisions were made. The door was locked, of course. Patricia was not a careless woman. She locked her secrets away just like she locked away her conscience. But she was also predictable. She used a keypad lock, a standard consumer model. I had watched her punch in the code 1,000 times, not with my eyes but with my ears. The distinct beep patterns and the wear on the buttons told a story. The numbers were 1975, her birth year. Vanity was always her weakness. I punched in the code. The lock clicked softly, a sound like a pistol cocking in the dark. I pushed the door open and slipped inside, closing it gently behind me. The room smelled of her perfume and expensive printer ink. I moved to her desk and woke up her computer. The screen glowed blue in the darkness, a harsh spotlight that made me squint. I inserted the flash drive Serena's security team had given me. It was a sophisticated piece of tech designed to clone the hard drive and install a keystroke logger. I didn't need to be a hacker. I just needed to be the delivery man. The progress bar on the screen crawled forward. 20%, 30%. Time stretched into eternity. My heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a drum solo of fear. I felt exposed, vulnerable. If they found me here now, the game would be over. There would be no police, no lawsuit, just an old man having a tragic fall down the stairs. Suddenly, I heard it. The heavy thud of footsteps in the hallway. I froze my hand, hovering over the mouse. Brandon. He walked with a heavy heel strike, a habit from his days of trying to look imposing. He was coming from the guest wing. He was heading toward the kitchen, which meant he had to pass right by this door. 50% complete. The footsteps got louder. They were slow, lazy. The walk of a man getting a glass of water. I looked around the room frantically. There was no closet. The curtains were too sheer. There was only the desk. It was a large mahogany piece with a solid front panel. I dropped to my knees, ignoring the sharp spike of pain that shot through my arthritic joints. I crawled into the knee hole of the desk, pulling my legs in tight against my chest, curling into a ball like a frightened child. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I held my breath. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle the wheezing of my old lungs. I could see the shadow of his feet through the gap at the bottom of the door. He was standing there, listening. Did he see the light from the monitor underneath the door? No, I had dimmed it. But was it enough? The doorknob turned. It rattled slightly. Locked from the inside. I had engaged the thumb turn automatically when I entered. Thank God for muscle memory. Mom, Brandon called out, his voice thick with sleep. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. Please don't let him have the key. Please don't let him wake her up. He waited a second. Then I heard a grunt. Just checking, he muttered to himself. The footsteps resumed, fading away toward the kitchen. I let out a breath that was more of a sob than an exhale. I stayed under the desk for what felt like an hour, listening to him open the fridge drink from a bottle and walk back to his room. Only when I heard his door click shut did I dare to crawl out. My knees cracked loudly in the silence, a betrayal of my own body. I looked at the screen. Transfer complete. 100%. I pulled the drive out and slipped it into my pajama pocket. But before I shut down the computer, I saw an email window open on the desktop. Patricia had been careless. She had left her inbox open. The subject line caught my eye. Strictly confidential, Patient Holloway. I clicked on it. I knew I shouldn't. I had the data. I should go, but I had to know. I had to see the face of the monster. It was a thread between Patricia and Dr. Evans. The timestamps went back 6 months. The latest email read, "The dosage is accurate, Patricia. If you increase it any more, we risk respiratory failure. I need him pliable, not dead. At least not before the ink is dry on the power of attorney. Once he is in the facility, we can adjust the medication to ensure permanent cognitive decline. He won't remember his own name by Christmas." I stared at the words. Permanent cognitive decline. They weren't just stealing my money. They were stealing my mind. They were planning to erase Victor Halloway, to wipe the slate clean so they could scribble their own greedy numbers on it. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach, replacing the fear. It was a heavy, solid thing like a steel beam. It anchored me. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was just focused. I shut down the computer, wiped the keyboard with my sleeve to remove fingerprints, and slipped out of the room. I navigated the hallway back to my bedroom, my steps lighter now, fueled by the clarity of war. I closed my bedroom door and leaned against it, trying to slow my heart rate. I was safe. I had the evidence. I had the weapon. I walked over to my nightstand to put the flash drive in my hiding spot inside the hollow base of my lamp. That was when I saw it. On the small reading table by the window where I usually sat to watch the birds, there was a document. It hadn't been there when I went to bed. Patricia must have placed it there while I was sleeping. A silent threat, or perhaps just efficiency. I picked it up in the moonlight. It was a form titled Voluntary Commitment to Assisted Living Facility. The patient name was filled out in Patricia's sharp, angular handwriting, Victor Halloway. Underneath, in the section for reason for admission, she had written advanced dementia, aggressive behavior, danger to self and others. And right next to it was a pen. She wasn't just planning to send me away. She was planning to make me sign myself away. She was going to use the confusion from the drugs to trick me into signing my own life sentence. She expected me to wake up tomorrow groggy and compliant and sign this paper thinking it was a breakfast menu or a receipt. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I looked old. I looked frail. But the eyes staring back were burning. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket right next to the flash drive. "You want a signature, Patricia," I whispered to the empty room. "I will give you a signature. But it won't be on this paper. It will be on your arrest warrant." I lay back down in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sun to rise. Tomorrow was the day. Tomorrow, the Skyline project would be signed. And tomorrow, the architect would finally bring the house down. The dining room was a theater of cruelty that night. Patricia had pulled out all the stops. The crystal chandelier was polished to a blinding shine. The good china, which had been a wedding gift from my first mother-in-law, was laid out, and the table was crowded with relatives who hadn't visited in years. These were Patricia's people. Cousins who borrowed money and never paid it back, an aunt who smelled of mothballs and judgment, and a brother who had once tried to sell me a timeshare in a swamp. They were all there, circling the scent of money like sharks sensing blood in the water. I sat at the head of the table, but I wasn't the host. I was the prop. Patricia had dressed me in a velvet smoking jacket that was 2 sizes too big, making me look shrunken and pathetic. She had positioned my wheelchair, which I didn't need, but she insisted I use for comfort, so that I was trapped between the table and the sideboard. "Everyone, please raise your glasses," Patricia announced, tapping a spoon against her champagne flute. The sound rang out sharp and clear. "To my wonderful husband, Victor, and to the incredible future he has secured for this family. Even in his twilight years, he is still providing for us." "Hear, hear," the table chorused. They drank the expensive wine I had bought 10 years ago for a special occasion. This was not that occasion. I sat silent, staring at the bowl of pumpkin soup in front of me. I made my hands tremble on the armrests of the chair. It was getting harder to keep up the act. Every fiber of my being wanted to stand up, flip the table, and scream the truth into their smug faces. But I couldn't. Not yet. The trap had to be perfect. "Oh, look at him," Patricia cooed loud enough for the entire room to hear. "He is having trouble with his spoon again. Poor darling. His motor skills are just fading so fast these days." She stood up and walked over to me. She picked up my spoon, dipped it into the soup, and held it to my lips. "Here, let me help you, Victor." open wide. The humiliation was physical. It burned in my chest, hotter than the soup. I opened my mouth. I let her feed me like an infant. The soup dripped down my chin. I didn't wipe it. I let it stay there, a badge of my supposed incompetence. The guests looked away, feigning polite sympathy, but I saw the smirks. I saw the relief in their eyes. They were glad it wasn't them. They were glad the old lion had lost his teeth. "You are such a saint, Patricia," her aunt murmured. "I don't know how you do it, taking care of him day in and day out. It must be exhausting." "It is a labor of love," Patricia sighed, wiping my chin with a rough napkin. "I made a vow, didn't I? In sickness and in health. And now that the Skyline deal is happening, I can finally afford the best care for him. He deserves to be comfortable in his final years." She meant the facility. She meant the padded room and the heavy sedation. She was toasting to my imprisonment. Brandon was sitting to my right, already 3 glasses deep into the scotch. He was flushed and loud, dominating the conversation with stories of how he brokered the deal with Knight Global. He was lying, of course. He hadn't done a thing except forge signatures and spend money. "You know," Brandon said, leaning back and loosening his tie, "the funny thing is, Dad never had the guts to pull off a deal this big when he was actually working. He was always too cautious, too obsessed with safety margins and ethics." He laughed, and a few cousins chuckled nervously along with him. Patricia smiled indulgently at her son. "Now, Brandon, be nice." Victor did his best. He was just limited. He didn't have your vision. Limited, Brandon scoffed. He poured himself another drink. He was held back. You know who held him back, that first wife of his? Lillian. The room went quiet. Even Patricia's relatives knew that Lillian was a forbidden topic. She had been the love of my life, a woman of grace and intelligence who had died of cancer 15 years ago. She was the reason I built bridges. She was the one who told me that connection was the most important thing in the world. Brandon didn't notice the silence. He was on a roll. Lillian was a drag, he continued, slurring his words. She was always donating money to charity, always talking about giving back. If Dad hadn't wasted so much money on her medical bills and her stupid foundations, we would be billionaires by now. God, she was such a weak woman. It is a good thing she is gone. Now we can finally use this money for things that matter, like fast cars and real estate. The world stopped. The sound of the clinking silverware faded. The chatter of the guests turned into a dull buzz. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. It sounded like a roaring river. He had insulted my work. He had stolen my money. He had poisoned my body. I had taken it all. I had swallowed every insult. But Lillian. My hand resting on my lap under the tablecloth clenched into a fist. I squeezed so hard that my fingernails cut into the palm of my hand. I felt the skin break. I felt the warm trickle of blood. The pain was sharp and grounding. It was the only thing keeping me from reaching for the steak knife on the table and burying it in his hand. I looked at him. I looked at his sweaty, arrogant face. I imagined the structure of his jaw, the fragility of the bone, how easily it would shatter. The engineer in me calculated the force required. It wouldn't take much. "Victor," Patricia asked, sensing the shift in my energy. Her hand hovered over my shoulder. "Are you okay? You are shaking." I was shaking. But not from Parkinson's. Not from fear. I was shaking from the effort of holding back a hurricane. I closed my eyes. I pictured Lillian. I saw her smile. I heard her voice telling me, "Patience, Victor. The strongest structures are the ones that can flex in the wind." I took a deep breath. I let it out slowly. I unclenched my fist, feeling the sting of the cuts on my palm. The pain was good. The pain was focus. I opened my eyes and turned my head slowly to look at Brandon. He was holding his glass up, waiting for a toast to his own brilliance. He looked down at me, expecting to see the vacant stare of the drugged old man. Instead, I looked him right in the eyes, and I smiled. It wasn't the confused smile I had been wearing all week. It wasn't a polite smile. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. My lips curled up, but my gaze remained dead cold and absolutely lucid. It was the smile of a predator who knows the trap has already snapped shut and the prey just hasn't felt the pain yet. Brandon's grin faltered. He lowered his glass slowly. He blinked, confusion clouding his drunken eyes. He looked around the room as if checking to see if anyone else saw it. But everyone was looking at their plates. He looked back at me. I held the gaze. I didn't blink. I widened the smile just a fraction, letting him see the intelligence behind it. What Brandon muttered, his voice losing its bravado. "What are you looking at, old man?" I didn't answer. I just kept smiling. A shiver seemed to run through him. He set his glass down, splashing liquid onto the tablecloth. He rubbed his arms as if a cold draft had just swept through the room. "Jesus," he whispered, "you are creeping me out." I turned back to my soup. I dipped the spoon in with a steady hand, perfectly steady, and brought it to my mouth. I ate it. I didn't spill a drop. Patricia didn't notice. She was too busy preening for her guests. But Brandon noticed. He spent the rest of the meal staring at me, pale and silent, trying to figure out what he had just seen. He didn't know that he had just looked into the eyes of his executioner. And tomorrow, the blade would fall. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor of the Knight Global building was silent, but the air pressure wasn't the only thing making my ears pop. The tension in the small metal box was thick enough to choke on. I stood in the back, leaning heavily on my cane, my head bowed in that submissive, defeated posture I had perfected over the last week. Patricia stood in front of me, checking her reflection in the polished brass doors. She was wearing her closing suit, a sharp navy blazer that she thought made her look like a CEO. To me, she just looked like a vulture that had finally found a carcass big enough to feed on. Brandon was beside her, tapping his foot nervously, clutching the briefcase that contained the signed collateral agreements, the documents that effectively mortgaged our entire existence. We stepped out into the lobby. It was a cathedral of glass and steel, the kind of architecture that screams power. I looked at the support beams near the ceiling, noting the cross-bracing. Even here in the lion's den, I couldn't stop being an engineer. I found comfort in the physics of the building. Gravity doesn't lie. Tension doesn't lie. Only people do. We were ushered into a conference room that overlooked the entire city. The table was a slab of black marble, cold and imposing. Sitting at the far end was Serena's legal representative, a man named Mr. Sterling. He was sharp, efficient, and completely unreadable. Serena herself was not there, which was part of the plan. She had to remain distant to maintain the illusion that this was a purely business transaction. Next to Mr. Sterling sat a man I knew all too well, though I had never spoken a word of truth to him. Dr. Evans. The man who had violated his Hippocratic oath for a paycheck. He was sweating slightly, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. He refused to meet my eyes when I shuffled into the room. "Please sit down, Mr. Oh," Sterling said, gesturing to the leather chairs. "We have a lot to get through today. The Skyline project is ready to break ground, but as you know, Ms. Knight insists on Mr. Halloway's direct involvement as the primary consultant." Patricia sat down next to me, placing a possessive hand on my arm. "Of course," she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "Victor is so ready. Aren't you, darling?" I blinked slowly, letting my mouth hang open just a fraction. I nodded vaguely, staring at the water pitcher in the center of the table as if it were the most fascinating thing I had ever seen. "Yes," I mumbled. "Ready. Build the tower." Brandon kicked me under the table, a subtle warning to shut up and look competent enough to sign, but not competent enough to ask questions. Mr. Sterling slid a thick document across the marble. It made a heavy, ominous sound. "This is the consultancy agreement," Sterling said. It stipulates a $50 million retainer fee payable to the lead consultant upon execution of duties. However, given the sensitivity of the project, we need Mr. Halloway to sign this in person, verifying that he is of sound mind and capable of fulfilling the architectural obligations. I saw Patricia's eyes light up at the words 50 million. She reached for the pen. She was practically vibrating. I reached out my shaking hand. I touched the paper. This was the moment. I just needed to touch the pen to the paper, and then the trap would be sprung. But before I could even lift the pen, a chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I object," a voice boomed. It was Dr. Evans. He stood up, clutching a thick medical file to his chest. His face was pale, but his voice was rehearsed. This was the ambush. This was the twist I had suspected, but hoped I was wrong about. They didn't just want me to sign. They wanted to erase me completely. "I cannot in good conscience allow this proceeding to continue," Dr. Evans declared, looking strictly at Mr. Sterling. "As Mr. Halloway's primary physician for the past 3 years, I have a duty to inform all parties of his medical reality." Patricia gasped. It was a perfect theatrical gasp. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes widening in mock horror. "Dr. Evans," she cried out. "What are you doing? You promised to keep his condition private. We didn't want to embarrass him." "It is too late for that," Patricia Evans said, shaking his head solemnly. He threw the file onto the table. It slid across the marble and stopped right in front of Mr. Sterling. "These are Victor Halloway's latest MRI scans and cognitive assessment results," Evans continued. "The diagnosis is unequivocal. Advanced Alzheimer's disease with rapid cortical atrophy. The man sitting before you does not know what year it is. He does not know the value of money. He is clinically incapable of entering into a legal contract." I sat there frozen. I felt the blood drain from my face. Not because I was sick, but because the lie was so monstrous. They were using my life, my mind, as a pawn. I looked at the file. I could see the edge of a brain scan sticking out. It wasn't even my brain. It was a stock image, or perhaps the scan of some poor soul who had actually lost their mind. Mr. Sterling picked up the file. He leafed through it, his expression grave. "This is a serious allegation," Dr. Sterling said. "If Mr. Halloway is incompetent, this contract is void." "No," Patricia shouted, standing up. She threw herself onto the table, grabbing the doctor's arm. "Please don't say that. The project is his dream. It is the only thing keeping him alive." Then she turned to Mr. Sterling, tears streaming down her face. Real wet tears. She was a better actress than I had ever given her credit for. "I tried to protect him," she sobbed. "I didn't want the world to know he was fading. I thought if he just signed, I could help him do the work. I could guide his hand. I just wanted him to feel useful one last time." She collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands. Brandon put an arm around her, looking suitably somber. "We love him so much," Brandon said, his voice cracking. "We just wanted to honor his legacy." Mr. Sterling looked at them, then at me. I was staring at them, my hands resting on the table. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I let them dig the hole deeper. "If he cannot sign," Sterling said, closing the file, "then the deal is off." Ms. Knight was very specific. "Wait," Patricia said, looking up suddenly. Her eyes were red, but behind the tears I saw the steel trap of her ambition snapping shut. "There is a solution." She reached into her oversized handbag and pulled out another document. It was notarized. It was stamped. "Dr. Evans and I foresaw this possibility," she said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "Given his rapid decline, we filed for emergency guardianship this morning. The court granted it an hour ago based on the medical evidence provided by Dr. Evans." She slid the guardianship papers across the table. "I am his legal guardian," Patricia declared. "I have full power of attorney over his assets, his medical decisions, and his business affairs. If Victor cannot sign, I can sign for him." The law allows the guardian to execute contracts that are in the best interest of the ward, and this $50 million is certainly in his best interest. It will pay for the 24-hour care he is going to need. I watched Mr. Sterling pick up the guardianship papers. He examined the seal. He examined the signatures. Patricia's lawyer, a weasel of a man who had been sitting quietly in the corner, finally spoke up. He leaned forward, a smug grin plastered on his face. "It is ironclad, Mr. Sterling. Under state law, Mrs. Halloway is now effectively Mr. Halloway. Her signature is his signature. The project can proceed. The money can be transferred. And Mr. Halloway can be moved to a facility where he will be safe." Safe. The word hung in the air like a threat. They weren't just taking the money. They were taking my freedom. They were going to lock me away in a room with soft walls and drug me until I really did forget who I was. Patricia looked at me then. For a brief second, the mask slipped. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated triumph. Her eyes said, "I won. You are nothing. You are just a body now." Mr. Sterling looked at the papers, then at me. "Mr. Halloway," he asked, "do you understand what is happening?" I looked at him. I looked at the doctor who had betrayed his oath. I looked at the stepson who mocked my dead wife. I looked at the wife who planned to bury me alive. I let my lower lip tremble. I looked down at my hands. I want to go home," I whispered. Patricia let out a relieved sigh. "See," she said, "he is confused. He just wants to rest. Let me sign. Let's finish this." Mr. Sterling nodded slowly. He pushed the $50 million contract toward Patricia. "Very well," he said. "As the legal guardian, you may sign on his behalf." Patricia picked up the pen. Her hand didn't shake. She looked at the paper as if it were a winning lottery ticket. She pressed the tip of the pen to the signature line. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the loudest sound in the room. It sounded like a key turning in a lock. But they didn't realize that they weren't locking me in. They were locking themselves in with me. And I was holding the detonator. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper stopped. It didn't stop because Patricia finished signing. It stopped because my hand, the hand that had been trembling uncontrollably for the last hour, suddenly shot out and clamped down on her wrist. My grip was not the grip of a frail 70-year-old invalid. It was the grip of a man who had spent 40 years climbing scaffolding and bending rebar. It was a vise of steel. Patricia let out a small, startled gasp. She tried to pull her hand away, but I didn't budge. I could feel her pulse fluttering frantically beneath my fingers, a hummingbird trapped in a cage. "Victor," she whispered, her eyes wide with confusion. "What are you doing? Let go, you are hurting me." I didn't let go. Instead, I slowly pushed my chair back. The sound of the expensive leather scraping against the marble floor echoed through the silent conference room like a thunderclap. I stood up. I didn't struggle to rise. I didn't lean on the table. I didn't reach for my cane. I stood up straight, unfolding my full height, my spine aligning perfectly, my shoulders rolling back to shed the weight of the false years I had been carrying. The room went deadly silent. Mr. Sterling stopped breathing. Brandon froze with his mouth half open. Dr. Evans looked as if he had seen a ghost rising from the grave. I looked down at Patricia. Her face was a mask of terror. She looked at my hand on her wrist, then up at my face. She didn't see the cloudy, confused eyes of her husband anymore. She saw the eyes of the chief engineer. "Put the pen down, Patricia," I said. My voice was not the raspy whisper I had used this morning. It was deep. It was resonant. It was the voice that used to command 500 construction workers over the roar of pile drivers. It filled the room, bouncing off the glass walls, leaving nowhere to hide. I said, "Put it down." Her fingers went slack. The pen clattered onto the marble table, rolling away like a discarded bullet casing. I released her wrist with a shove that sent her stumbling back into her chair. I walked around the table. My stride was long and purposeful. I ignored the cane leaning against my chair. I didn't need it. I never needed it. I walked to the head of the room, standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city I had helped build. Alzheimer's, I said, turning to face them. I let the word hang in the air. You say I have Alzheimer's. You say my brain is atrophying. You say I cannot process complex information. I looked directly at Dr. Evans. He shrank back in his seat, clutching his briefcase as if it could shield him from the truth. Tell me, doctor. I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. If my cognitive functions are so severely impaired, how did I manage to bypass the biometric security of this building to upload a file to the main server 10 minutes before this meeting started? Patricia found her voice. It was shrill and desperate. What are you talking about? You are confused. You are having an episode. Doctor, do something, sedate him. I laughed. It was a dry, hard sound. No, Patricia. There are no more episodes. There is only the data. And as an engineer, I never present a theory without data. I reached into my pocket. I didn't pull out a handkerchief or a pill bottle. I pulled out a small remote control. I pointed it at the massive presentation screen behind Mr. Sterling. Let's look at the test results, shall we? I said. I pressed the button. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a brain scan. It was a high-definition video feed. The timestamp in the corner read, yesterday, 7:14 a.m. The angle was high, looking down from the smoke detector in our kitchen, a camera I had installed myself 3 years ago, one that Patricia thought was broken because I had cut the indicator light. The image was crystal clear. It showed Patricia standing at the kitchen island. She was holding a bottle of pills. The label was clearly visible, phenobarbital. She wasn't taking a pill. She was crushing it with the back of a spoon. She was grinding it into a fine blue powder. The room watched in horrified silence as the woman on the screen poured the powder into a glass of warm milk, stirred it vigorously, and then turned to smile at someone off camera. There it is. I narrated, my voice cold. The secret ingredient. The special care you promised me. Patricia let out a strangled cry. That is deepfake. That is not real. He manipulated it. He is a crazy old man. He doesn't know how to use a computer. I didn't argue. I just pressed the button again. The video changed. This time the timestamp was from last night. The location was the living room. The audio quality was pristine. Just let him sign the papers. Patricia's voice rang out through the conference room speakers loud and clear. After that, he can rot in a padded room for all I care. We will tell the press he took a sudden turn for the worse. Then Brandon's voice joined in. What if he wakes up? What if the drugs wear off? He won't. Patricia's recorded voice replied, filled with malice. Dr. Evans said if we double the dose after he gets to the facility, his brain will turn to mush in a month. He will be a vegetable, Brandon. A very rich vegetable. I clicked the remote, freezing the image on Patricia's face, twisted in a cruel sneer. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a structure collapsing, the dust settling after the demolition charges have blown. I looked at Brandon. He was shaking. He looked at the screen, then at me, then at the door. He looked like a trapped rat, realizing there was no cheese, only poison. I looked at Patricia. She was pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The arrogance was gone. The mask was shattered. She looked small. She looked cheap. And you, I said, turning my gaze to Dr. Evans. The doctor scrambled to his feet. His chair toppled over backward with a crash. Panic was pouring off him in waves. I didn't know, he stammered, backing away toward the door. I was misled. She told me it was for his own good. I have to go. I have patience. I cannot be part of this. He turned and ran for the door. He grabbed the handle and yanked it down. It didn't move. He yanked it again, harder, locked. He spun around, sweat dripping down his face. Open this door. You can't keep me here. This is kidnapping. I shook my head slowly. No, doctor. Kidnapping is when you take a sane man and lock him in a dementia ward against his will. This is just a containment protocol. I looked at Mr. Sterling, who had been watching the entire scene with a look of grim satisfaction. He nodded at me. Mr. Sterling pressed the intercom button on the table. Send them in, he said. The side door, the one concealed within the wood paneling, slid open. 2 uniformed police officers stepped in. Behind them came 2 men in suits, federal agents. And finally, Serena Knight walked in. She didn't look at Patricia. She didn't look at Brandon. She walked straight to me. She stopped in front of me and placed a hand on my shoulder. Are you okay, Uncle Victor? She asked softly. I looked at the people who had tried to destroy me. I looked at the fear in their eyes. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I am fine, Serena, I said, my voice steady. The structure held. Patricia suddenly lunged toward me. It was a desperate, feral move. Victor, she screamed, tears streaming down her face again, but this time they were tears of terror. Victor, please, I am your wife. They made me do it. Brandon made me do it. I love you. Don't let them take me. She tried to grab my lapels, but the police officers were faster. They intercepted her, pulling her arms behind her back. The click of the handcuffs was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Brandon was already on his knees, sobbing, begging Mr. Sterling to cut a deal. Dr. Evans was slumped against the door, hyperventilating as an officer read him his rights. I walked over to Patricia. I looked her in the eye one last time. You don't love me, Patricia, I said quietly. You loved the architecture of my life. You loved the foundation I built. But you forgot the most basic rule of engineering. I leaned in close so only she could hear me. If you build on a lie, the collapse is inevitable. I turned my back on her. I didn't watch them drag her out. I didn't need to. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was shining on the steel and glass. It was a beautiful day for a demolition. You cannot arrest me! Patricia screamed, her voice cracking into a desperate shriek that echoed off the glass walls of the conference room. She was fighting against the grip of the officers, her heels scraping uselessly against the marble floor. The carefully constructed facade of the sophisticated socialite had completely disintegrated, revealing the terrified, greedy creature underneath. I stood by the window watching her struggle. It was like watching a building sway in an earthquake the moment before the rivets shear and the steel buckles. She wasn't looking at the police anymore. She was looking at me. Her eyes were wide, frantic, searching for any lever she could pull, any button she could press to stop the collapse. Wait, she yelled, twisting her body so she could face Mr. Sterling. Wait just a minute. You can't take everything. I am his wife. Do you hear me? I am his lawful wedded wife. She stopped, struggling for a second, panting heavily, her chest heaving. She looked at me with a sudden, sharp clarity. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a flash of legal calculation. I know my rights, she hissed, spitting the words out like venom. We have been married for 15 years. This is a community property state. Even if you prove fraud, even if you divorce me, I am entitled to half. Half of the house, half of the portfolio, half of his pension. She laughed, then a manic, broken sound. You think you won, Victor. You think you can just walk away. You are going to have to pay me to leave. I earned that money. I put up with your boring stories. I put up with your old man's smell. I wasted the best years of my life nursing you. I am taking half of everything you own. She looked at Brandon, who was still on his knees, weeping silently. Get up, Brandon, she snapped. Stop crying. We are still rich. He can't cut us out completely. The law protects the spouse. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her. I felt a strange sense of pity not for her situation, but for her ignorance. She had spent 15 years living in my house, sleeping in my bed, and she had never once bothered to ask who actually owned the roof over her head. I nodded to Serena. It was her turn. She was the one who had uncovered the paper trail, and she deserved the pleasure of delivering the final structural failure. Serena stepped forward. She held a thin blue folder in her hand. She didn't look angry. She looked almost bored, like an accountant explaining a tax error. Mrs. Halloway, Serena said, her voice calm and precise. You seem to be laboring under a significant misunderstanding regarding my uncle's assets. Patricia sneered at her. Shut up. This is between me and my husband. Actually, Serena continued, opening the folder. It is between you and the Lillian Halloway Charitable Trust. Patricia froze. The name of my late wife hung in the air like a ghost. What Patricia whispered. Serena pulled out a document yellowed with age and held it up. 15 years ago, 3 days before he married you, Victor realized that he could never love anyone the way he loved Lillian. He also realized that he was a wealthy man entering into a marriage with a woman who, let's say, had a very ambitious spending history. Serena walked closer to Patricia, making sure she could see the signatures on the document. So on the advice of his legal counsel, Victor transferred the deed to the estate, the entire bond portfolio, and all future patent royalties into an irrevocable trust named after his late wife. Serena closed the folder with a soft snap. Victor doesn't own the house in the Hamptons, Patricia. The trust does. Victor doesn't own the bonds you tried to steal. The trust does. Victor is merely the appointed manager with a modest living stipend. He owns nothing, which means by law you own half of nothing. Patricia's face went from pale to a terrifying shade of gray. Her knees seemed to give way, and the officer had to hold her up to keep her from sliding to the floor. No, she gasped. That is impossible. We lived there. I renovated the kitchen. I bought the furniture. Using the stipend, Serena corrected, which I might add you have overspent by a significant margin. I watched the realization hit her. It was a physical blow. Her eyes darted around the room, seeing the walls closing in. But I wasn't done. The trust was the shield, but I needed to use the sword. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. He picked up the collateral agreement that Patricia and Brandon had signed just 20 minutes ago, the one where they pledged their own assets to secure the $50 million project. There is also the matter of this contract, Mr. Sterling said, tapping the paper. You signed a personal guarantee, Mrs. Halloway. You and your son pledged your personal liquidity to cover the performance bond. Patricia looked at him confused. But the deal is off. You said the deal is off because Victor is incompetent. Mr. Sterling smiled. It was a shark's smile. The consultancy deal is off, yes, but the collateral agreement, that is a separate instrument. You signed it as the legal guardian certifying that you had the funds to back the project. Since you attempted to defraud Knight Global by presenting a mentally incapacitated consultant, you are in breach of contract. He leaned forward. The penalty for breach of contract is immediate forfeiture of the pledged collateral. Patricia shook her head violently. But I don't have $50 million. You know I don't, we know, Mr. Sterling said. But we also know about the loans. He picked up a stack of papers from his briefcase. We ran a credit check on you and Brandon this morning. It seems that in anticipation of this big payday, you have borrowed heavily against the expected earnings. You took out high-interest loans from some very unofficial lenders in the city. You bought a Porsche on credit. You bought jewelry on credit. You even borrowed against your own life insurance policies. Mr. Sterling dropped the papers. They scattered on the floor at Brandon's feet. Those lenders are going to want their money back, Mrs. Halloway. And since Knight Global is now freezing all your accounts pending the fraud investigation, I am afraid you are going to have a very difficult conversation with some very dangerous people." Brandon let out a wail of pure terror. He knew who the lenders were. He was the one who had set up the meetings in the back rooms of shady casinos. He knew what happened when you didn't pay. Patricia looked at her son. She looked at the handcuffs on her wrists. She looked at the luxury suit she was wearing, which I now knew she hadn't paid for. She turned to me one last time. The anger was gone. The entitlement was gone. There was only the raw, naked fear of a woman who realizes she is not just poor, but hunted. "Victor," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You can't let them do this. The loan sharks. They will kill Brandon. They will hurt me. Please. I am begging you. We will go away. We will disappear. Just help us pay them off. You have the money. I know the trust has money. Please." I looked at her. I remembered the soup dripping down my chin. I remembered the blue powder in the milk. I remembered the way she looked at me when she thought I was mindlessly staring at the wall. I walked over to her. I stood close enough to smell the expensive perfume that she had bought with stolen money. "I can't help you, Patricia," I said, my voice flat and emotionless. Why, she sobbed. "Why?" "Because I am just a confused old man," I said, repeating the words she had used to dismiss me for years. "I don't understand money. I don't understand business. I just want to go home and feed the pigeons." I turned to the police officer. "Officer, get them out of my sight. They are trespassing." "No," Patricia screamed as they dragged her backward. "Victor." No, Brandon was hauled to his feet, his legs dragging snot running down his face. He looked at me pleading silently, but I looked through him as if he were made of glass. I watched them go. I watched them get dragged through the beautiful glass doors of the conference room. I watched Patricia's heels leave scuff marks on the floor, the only legacy she would leave behind in this city. Her screams faded as the elevator doors closed, cutting off the noise, leaving only the hum of the air conditioning and the beating of my own heart. I stood there for a long moment. I felt Serena's hand on my arm. "It is over, Uncle Victor," she said softly. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. For the first time in months, they were perfectly steady. "No," I said, turning to look out at the skyline. "It isn't over. It is just the demolition phase. Now I have to clear the rubble." I walked back to the table and picked up my cane. I didn't need it to walk, but I liked the weight of it. It felt like a tool. And I had a lot of work to do. 3 weeks later, the air smelled different. It did not smell of expensive perfume or roasted coffee or the fresh-cut grass of the Hamptons estate. It smelled of industrial bleach, stale sweat, and the metallic tang of iron bars. I walked down the long gray corridor of the county detention center, my footsteps echoing on the concrete. I did not have my cane. I walked with my back straight, my hands clasped behind me, listening to the heavy clank of the electronic locks engaging and disengaging as the guards escorted me deeper into the belly of the beast. I had come to see the ruins. First, I asked to see Brandon. The guard looked at me with a mixture of pity and respect. He checked his clipboard and shook his head. "You have 5 minutes, Mr. Holloway," he said. "The kid is in rough shape. We had to move him to protective custody yesterday." Why I asked, though, I already knew the answer. "Debt," the guard replied flatly. "Word gets around in here fast. He owes a lot of money to people on the outside. And those people have friends on the inside. He was trying to buy protection with cigarettes he didn't have. He got a broken nose and 2 cracked ribs for his trouble." I walked into the small interview room. Brandon was already there, chained to the table. I barely recognized him. The swaggering, arrogant young man who had laughed at my dead wife, who had driven my car and drunk my scotch, was gone. In his place was a shivering, broken child in a bright orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. His face was a map of bruises. His left eye was swollen shut, a purple and yellow testament to his new reality. When he saw me, he started to cry. It wasn't the fake, manipulative crying he used to do to get money from his mother. It was the raw, ugly sobbing of a creature that knows it is trapped. "Dad," he blubbered, leaning as far across the table as the chains would allow. "Dad, you have to get me out. Please. They are going to kill me. You don't understand. The guys in here, they know about the loans. They know I can't pay." I sat down, slowly smoothing the crease in my trousers. I looked at him calmly. "I am not your father, Brandon," I said softly, "and I can't get you out. You signed the confession. You admitted to fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. You are going to be here for a long time." But the money, he begged, snot running down his face. "Just pay off the sharks, please. If you pay them, they will call off the hit. I will do anything. I will sign away my rights to the house. I will disappear." I leaned forward. "You don't have any rights to the house, Brandon. You never did. And as for the money, I am afraid my assets are tied up in a trust. I am just a pensioner. Remember, I can't afford to pay off gambling debts and loan sharks." He slumped back in his chair, realizing that the narrative he had helped build was now the cage that held him. I stood up. I didn't say goodbye. I just tapped on the glass for the guard. As I walked away, I heard him screaming my name, a desperate wailing sound that was cut off as the heavy steel door slammed shut. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I just felt the cold satisfaction of an equation balancing out. Action and reaction, force and counterforce. Then I went to see Patricia. The women's wing was quieter, but the despair was just as thick. I waited in the visitation area, sitting on a hard plastic stool. When they brought her in, I had to suppress a gasp. It had only been 3 weeks, but she had aged 10 years. Without her expensive creams, her hair dye, and her makeup, the illusion of youth had evaporated. Her roots were showing a stark gray against the unnatural blonde. Her skin was sallow and lined. She looked small. She looked ordinary. She sat down opposite me. She didn't cry. She just stared at me with dull, hateful eyes. She looked at my suit, a new one, charcoal gray, tailored perfectly. She looked at the expensive watch on my wrist. She saw the vitality returning to my face. "You look good," she spat out, her voice raspy from lack of use. "I am feeling much better." "Thank you," I replied politely. "It is amazing what happens when you stop ingesting poison every night." She flinched. She looked down at her hands, which were rough and unmanicured. "Have you come to gloat, Victor?" she asked quietly. "Have you come to see the witch in her cage?" "No," I said. "I came to bring you this." I slid a manila envelope across the metal table. She looked at it suspiciously. "What is it?" she asked. "Divorce papers," I said, "and a restraining order, and a notice of eviction for your brother who was apparently trying to squat in the pool house." She laughed bitterly. She didn't touch the envelope. "You really thought of everything, didn't you?" she whispered. "You played the long game." "I didn't play a game, Patricia," I corrected her. "I lived my life. You were the one playing games. You were the one keeping score." She looked up at me, and for a moment the anger returned. "I took care of you," she hissed. "For 15 years. I cooked your meals. I washed your clothes. I listened to you ramble about bridges and tunnels. I gave you the best years of my life. And for what? To end up here. To end up with nothing." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the tragedy of her existence. She was a woman who had been so consumed by the want of more that she had failed to see what she already had. "You didn't end up with nothing because of me, Patricia," I said. "You ended up with nothing because you got greedy." I stood up. The visit was over. I had said what I needed to say, but she wasn't done. She slammed her hand on the table. "I made you," she screamed, her voice drawing the attention of the guards. "I gave you a family. You were just a lonely old man with a dead wife until I came along. You should be thanking me. You should be on your knees thanking me for tolerating you." I stopped. I turned back to her. The room went quiet. I looked at this woman who had poisoned my body and tried to steal my mind. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt clarity. "You are right about one thing, Patricia," I said, my voice calm and carrying to the corners of the room. "You spent your entire life searching for a wealthy man to take care of you. You hunted for him. You schemed for him." I leaned in closer so she could see the absolute truth in my eyes. "And the tragedy is, you found him. You had a billionaire husband sleeping right beside you every single night. I would have given you the world if you had just been kind. I would have given you the trust fund, the houses, everything. But you were too busy trying to turn him into an idiot to realize who he really was." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The knowledge that she had held the winning ticket in her hand for 15 years and had burned it because she didn't think it was worth anything. "You broke the foundation, Patricia," I said softly. "And now you have to live in the rubble." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I heard her start to scream a high, keening wail of regret that followed me all the way to the exit. I walked out into the bright sunshine of the parking lot. The air was fresh. The sky was blue. My driver was waiting. I got into the car, closed the door, and for the first time in a decade, I didn't look over my shoulder. I just looked ahead. The road was clear, and I had a lot of building left to do. The wind at 1,000 feet does not just blow, it howls. It tears at your clothes and stings your eyes and reminds you that human beings were not meant to live this close to the clouds. But to me it felt like the breath of God. I stood on the observation deck of the newly completed night tower, the steel grid beneath my feet vibrating with the hum of the city far below. 6 months ago, I was a prisoner in my own home, drugged and silenced, watching my life shrink into the corners of a dark room. Today, I was standing on top of the world. "Mr. Holloway." A voice called out over the wind. I turned to see Marcus, a young structural engineer fresh out of MIT, holding a tablet with trembling hands. He wasn't shaking from the cold. He was shaking because he was presenting his final load calculations to the man who wrote the textbooks he had studied in college. "The wind shear sensors are picking up a variance on the northwest face," Marcus said, shouting to be heard. "Do we need to adjust the dampers?" I walked over to the edge of the deck. I didn't look at the tablet. I placed my hand on the cold steel of the railing. I closed my eyes and felt the building sway. Every skyscraper breathes. It has to. If it is too rigid, it snaps. I felt the rhythm of the steel, the way the tension transferred down through the core to the bedrock deep beneath Manhattan. "No, Marcus," I said, opening my eyes. "The variance is within tolerance. The building is just flexing its muscles. It is settling into its bones. Leave the dampers alone. Trust the design." Marcus nodded furiously, typing notes into his tablet. He looked at me with a reverence that still felt strange. For years, I had been treated like a burden, a piece of furniture that needed dusting. Now these brilliant young minds looked at me as if I held the secrets of the universe. And perhaps in a way I did. I knew the secret of endurance. I watched the team of engineers working behind me. They were the future. Bright, eager, and full of hope. I had hired them myself. I had used the consultancy fee from the project not to buy sports cars or jewelry, but to start a mentorship program. I was building a new legacy, one that wasn't made of concrete, but of people. I took a moment to look at my hands resting on the cold steel railing. The same hands that had built bridges were the ones that had trembled uncontrollably while holding a spoon of soup just weeks ago. I remembered the burning shame I felt sitting at that dining table letting Patricia wipe my face while she mocked me to her relatives. I remembered the terrifying fog of the drugs, the sensation of slipping away into the dark, wondering if I really was losing my mind. But standing here now, feeling the solid vibration of the tower beneath my feet, that darkness felt like a different lifetime. I realized that the greatest victory wasn't seeing Patricia in handcuffs or Brandon in a cell. It wasn't even saving my fortune. The greatest victory was reclaiming my own agency. It was the ability to stand here lucid and sharp solving problems that would stump men half my age. One of the young interns, a bright girl named Maya, walked up to me with a blueprint interrupting my thoughts. "Mr. Holloway," she asked, pointing to a complex truss diagram. "The wind load calculations on the north face. Did you really calculate this by hand in 1995? I smiled, taking the plans from her. "I did," I replied, tapping the paper. "Computers are fast, Maya, but they don't have intuition. They don't feel the building breathe. You have to listen to the steel." She looked at me with pure, unadulterated respect. In her eyes, I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a senile old man or a burden. I was a master. And that was worth more than all the millions in the trust fund. I had rebuilt the most important structure of all my dignity. A hand slipped into the crook of my elbow. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Serena stood beside me, looking out at the endless horizon. She was wearing a hard hat over her impeccable hair, her face glowing with the pride of a daughter who has finally fulfilled a promise to her father. "We did it, Uncle Victor," she said softly. "The occupancy permit was issued this morning. The skyline is officially open." I looked at the view. From here I could see the bridge I designed in '82. I could see the tunnel entrance I reinforced in '95. My fingerprints were all over this city. But this tower, this needle of glass piercing the sky, was different. This was the monument to my second life. "You did it, Serena," I corrected her. "I just made sure it didn't fall down." She squeezed my arm. "You saved the company, you saved the project, and you saved yourself." I thought about the man I was 6 months ago, the man who sat at a dining table letting soup drip down his chin just to survive. I thought about Patricia and Brandon sitting in their cells blaming the world for their greed. I felt a moment of pity for them. Not regret, just pity. They had chosen to build their lives on the quicksand of lies. They never understood that the higher you climb, the deeper your foundation needs to be. I reached into the inside pocket of my coat. My fingers brushed against the worn edges of a photograph. I pulled it out. It was a black and white photo taken 40 years ago on a beach in Montauk. Lillian was laughing, her hair whipped across her face by the ocean breeze. She looked so alive, so full of light. I held the photo up against the backdrop of the city. The sun caught the glossy paper, making her smile seem to shine. "We made it." "Lillian," I whispered. I felt a lump form in my throat, but it wasn't a lump of sadness. It was gratitude. I had kept my promise to her. I hadn't let them destroy me. I hadn't let them erase the man she loved. I had fought back not with violence, but with the very intellect she had always admired. Serena looked at the photo and then at me. "She would be so proud of you, Victor," she said. I nodded, placing the photo back over my heart. She would be proud of us. I turned away from the edge. The wind was picking up, signaling a coming storm. But I wasn't afraid of storms anymore. I had weathered the hurricane in my own living room. I looked at the young engineers packing up their gear. I looked at Serena, the family I had chosen. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the thin, cold air. "Let's go down," I said, my voice strong and clear. "We have work to do. There is a bridge in Brooklyn that needs inspecting, and I have some ideas about how to reinforce the pylons." As we walked toward the elevator, I paused for one last look at the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of violet and gold. It was the end of the day, but for me it was just the morning. I was 72 years old, and my life was just beginning. Don't ever underestimate the silence of a man. Sometimes people think silence is weakness. They think it is surrender, but they are wrong. Sometimes silence is just the sound of a man checking the foundation. It is the sound of a man calculating the load. It is the pause before the lever is pulled. It is the quiet accumulation of power before the dam breaks. That is the lesson I leave you with. Be kind. Be generous. But never ever let anyone mistake your patience for permission to abuse you, because the quietest room is often the one where the storm is born. Here is the lesson I want you to take away from my story. We are often taught that family is everything, and that we must endure anything to keep the peace. But there is a difference between loyalty and servitude. When the people who are supposed to love you start treating you like a resource to be mined, rather than a human being to be cherished. You have the right to close the mine. Protecting yourself is not a betrayal. It is an act of self-respect. You are the architect of your own life. Do not let anyone else hold the pen. Thank you for listening to my journey from the shadows back into the light. If this story resonated with you, or if you have ever had to rebuild your life after a betrayal, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it is never too late to fight back. And tell me in the comments below, what is the one thing you have built in your life that you are most proud of? I read every single comment. Stay strong, stay silent when you need to, and always check the foundation. See you in the next story.